A 20-year-old petrol station worker was shot dead in Germany after asking a customer to mask up. The country has seen many protests, sometimes violent, over its hygiene rules. But the shooting was the first death directly linked to the restrictions. It prompted widespread shock and condemnation.
It's unbelievable. It's terrible, just terrible.
It was premeditated murder over nothing, only because we have measures that we're supposed to follow.
It's an escalation of conspiracy theories. How can this radicalization be stopped? Welcome to our COVID-19 special. Today, focusing on how the pandemic fuels anger among coronavirus skeptics right up to the point of physical violence, a phenomenon all over the world.
Most demonstrations against coronavirus regulations are peaceful, like here in Slovenia. But even this protest saw pockets of violence. In Melbourne, Australia, it was a different matter. Protests in mid-September escalated, with demonstrators targeting journalists.
The crowd is certainly getting bigger, and they're very passionate. I've just been struck in the back of the head by a can. That really hurt. I've been grabbed around the neck today. I've had urine tipped on me. Now I've had a can of an energy drink thrown on me.
Just moments before, protesters pushed Paul Dowsley and his camera team onto the pavement and threatened them. The organisation Reporters Without Borders says such acts have become more common everywhere since the pandemic started, including in Germany.
We're
dealing with a new kind of extremism here. It's no longer just left-wing and right-wing extremism and Islamism, but a kind of conspiracy extremism. I'm almost inclined to call it coronavirus extremism, because it really is an ideology of its own that's establishing itself and is now displaying violent traits and is acting out violence. An ideology with a reoccurring theme: conspiracy theories. They say face masks are nothing less than muzzles, that vaccinations will kill us, and the virus is an invention of the powerful to repress the people. Such beliefs make it difficult to get COVID-19 under control, and those subscribing to them can lose all sense of proportion. There are public calls for murder and revolution. So how can societies get radicalisation under control?
And that is something I'd like to explore now with Pia Lamberti and Peter Knight. Pia is a social psychologist with a special focus on conspiracy theories. She's written books and articles on this topic. And Peter is a professor of American Studies at the University of Manchester, which also co-organises the Infodemic project, studying the origin of conspiracy theories and how to combat them. Good to have both of you with us. And I'd like to start with you, Pia, and your assessment of what happened here in Germany, a young man being shot for pointing out the mask requirement to a customer who then said he wanted to set an example against the coronavirus restrictions. Is this just an isolated case, some individual gone mad, or do you see a trend?
I wouldn't say it's an isolated incident, because the reason why the person shot another man was because he said the mask was a representation of supposed suppression of free speech and so on. And this is something we see through the whole pandemic, that the mask is politicalized by populist parties, that they use it as a symbol to portray themselves as heroes. And we see that there's a lot of violence in the German society. We have so many incidents where people are beaten up because of the face mask. We have arson attacks against scientific institutions, against vaccine centers, against trains. And so I think if you frame it as a single incident, that's wrong, and you ignore the violence that we see since almost 2 years now.
And Peter, I mean, I know that there were corona protests in the UK, also in the United States. Do you observe a similar level of radicalisation there?
Yeah, and just in the last week, we've seen a number of incidents. For example, a man in Maryland allegedly killed his brother and sister-in-law because his brother was a pharmacist handing out COVID shots, vaccination shots. In the UK, there have been online a lot of calls for a second Nuremberg trial to arrest and execute journalists and doctors. So it can seem that Corona protests have become increasingly radicalized, but I think we need to view this slightly more skeptically. Vaccine refusal across the EU is at most 10%, perhaps in many countries only 5%. So we're talking about a small number of people who are taking these more extreme views. And certainly in terms of people engaged in acts of extreme violence, they are still very, very much in the minority, in a way that people who are attracted to forms of right-wing extremism online.
But is all of this down to misinformation, as the WHO, for example, suggests, or is there more to it? Why this radicalization, Peter?
It's not a lack of information when it comes to conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theorists have endless access to information. Instead, I think we need to think that conspiracy theorists are attracted to an entire worldview, a sense of identity, and no amount of fact-checking or kind of information supply is going to change their mind.
Okay, so not even something that would actually give them what they want. Pia, we've seen in the United Kingdom a few months ago, the so-called Freedom Day, all the mask rules, all those measures were dropped. Do you think, would a similar move here in Germany eventually appease radical corona deniers, or would they find something else to rant on about?
I don't think that this will change their mind. When we talk about these people with a strong ideology, it's not gone just because the measures are gone. We also see, when we have a look at the main ideologists behind this, they are already claiming climate change is the new topic. And when we had the bad floodings in Germany, they were spreading a lot of conspiracy theories about climate change. So I guess these networks are there. We can say that we have round about 200,000 people that are in these Telegram groups and channels and are the whole time confronted with these kind of conspiracy theories. And one problem is they are not the majority, of course, but they try to portray themselves as if they are speaking for the people and if they are the majority. And in Germany, they're very professional in doing so. And for example, in Berlin, now they changed the law that kids don't have to wear a face mask anymore in school. And the reason was because people wrote so many emails that they don't want that anymore. And this has to do with the mobilization from the spectrum. We can see that in our monitoring.
All right, Pia Lamberti there and Peter Knight. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. There's so much more to explore. Maybe we have another chance another time, because I'm afraid that topic will not go away anytime soon. So Pia Lamberti, Peter Knight, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Time now for one of your questions. Here's our science correspondent, Derek Williams.
What role does social media play in a lack of enthusiasm to get vaccinated?
This is another question that's kind of more socio-political than scientific, but science does have something to say about it, and I'll get back to that in a minute. First, though, let's think about social media. Seen from its most positive side, it's fantastic. Digital platforms allow us to share our thoughts and our beliefs with our family and our friends and our colleagues and the whole planet if we want to. Directly, instantly, unfiltered. They let us easily create and join communities, which is great, but that's also a double-edged sword, because researchers have shown pretty definitively that when it comes to big questions like whether or not to get vaccinated, most of us listen first to what our communities are saying, even if they disagree with expert advice. So if you're involved in communities online where pseudoscience and misinformation is widespread, then it'll probably have a big impact on what you eventually end up believing. Now the science. There are plenty of studies looking at how big of a role social media plays in vaccine acceptance or vaccine hesitancy. An interesting one conducted in the US back in December of last year, for instance. So right around the time that vaccines were first being rolled out and people were understandably wary, it revealed a fascinating split. Its results indicated that people who got some or most of their information from traditional media, like newspapers, rather than social media, that they were also the people most likely to accept vaccines. The authors concluded that that's because traditional media providers in general rely more on data-driven content. And other studies have come to similar conclusions. So while social media brings us together and has revolutionized how we interact with each other in lots of positive ways, in many places, it's also strengthened the echo chamber effect, and that contributes in a big way to division on questions like whether to get vaccinated or not.
More food for thought there. And that brings us to the end of this edition of our COVID-19 special from me and the team. Thanks for watching.